Hey everybody, welcome to Leading Thriving Cities, our show where we shine a spotlight on leadership in public service. And we have deep conversations about sustainability and how we create a thriving future for our cities. My name is Chad Wright. I'm the founder of Forward Partners, and today's guest is Matthew Wright. He's the Director of Human Resources for the city of Buda and also a former Austin police officer. We talk a lot about that transition from being in law enforcement to being in public service in a different way, and really what it looks like to be called to public service. And towards the end, we dive into the bad rap that pizza parties get and how they can actually be an effective tool to help people know that we love them. I think you're going to love this episode. Thank you so much for joining us on Leading Thriving Cities. Matt, thank you for joining us on Leading Thriving Cities. I've actually been looking forward to this just because you and I are really good friends. It started a while ago. We have a joint love of watches and connected on Instagram randomly. And then it turns out you were in law enforcement. I do work with law enforcement. So we just got to talking, had a lot of pancake breakfasts and lunches at Kirby Lane Cafe. So I've been looking forward to this. So you spent almost 23 years
23
with
a little
Austin
over
Police
23
Department. Yeah. And now you've made a very interesting transition still in public service into the HR world with the city of Buda.
Yeah.
And so I think we're going to have a fun conversation about that. So all these years in public service, at this point, you're talking, 24, 25 years in public service?
Yeah, about 25 years.
What do you wish people understood about public service, whether it's policing or HR, any realm?
It's not easy. Public service is not easy. It really is a calling. Like when I went into law enforcement, I went in because I felt it was a calling for me. I wanted to help people. The cliche things that you do. But once you get there, right, you start to see the real the toil that public service is. Now, not to say that it's not rewarding, because it is very rewarding, but you really have to want to serve people to do any type of public service. And
because sometimes you're serving people that don't want to be served.
Absolutely. Yeah. In law enforcement, most of the time, the people that you're serving, they're calling you on their worst day. So, and that happens, a lot in HR too. When you're serving people in HR, it's typically on their worst day.
I never thought of that, but like both departments, it's not like anybody's calling just to go, hey, how's your day going today?
I've been told that HR is the police of the city, so
That's interesting.
It's kind of you talk about the transition from law enforcement to HR, and it was a little bit, it felt seamless, but even then though, public service is hard. So I would say that you really need to know that you're good with serving people, that you're okay with the intrinsic value that comes with it, because there's not a lot of praise for public service, right?
Right.
And so the intrinsic value that you get from it really is worth it. But it's not easy. And so I would think that's really the biggest thing I'd want people to know, that public service can be very rewarding. It's not easy, but if you can sustain in it and, do the right thing, then it can be a long and rewarding career.
That right there, sustaining it. And I think that's, most of the work we're doing is how do we create a thriving environment for people? Because what we encounter is people that enter public service with that heart to serve, 20, 30 years later, they are burned out. They're a different human being. Everybody's clapping them out the door because they're just happy to see them go, right? It's ultimately about designing that journey where you actually love each day. And I think that's really hard to do because I don't know if we can do all the work ourselves. It requires leaders around us to build that environment. And that's a real challenge. So you obviously had a choice. You retired from Austin PD and you're like, I can literally do anything. But you said, I want to stay in public service. And so what was it that kind of drove you to want to keep serving in that way?
Well, I knew that I wanted to continue in public service, but I knew that I was done with law enforcement. And that decision probably came about 4 or 5 years earlier when I was with APD still. And I knew that I wanted to transition out. So I just had to figure out what that looked like. And so that's one of the things that I would tell anybody in law enforcement. If you're looking to transition out, you got to start years before that time comes.
It takes a real plan, right? You got to build a foundation of how you're really going to do this.
Absolutely. And it also involves building a network of people. Making contact with the right people, especially and figuring out where you want to go. I knew that I wanted to continue in public service. I have and I still have this desire maybe to go city management route, ACM, city manager. And one of the best pieces of advice that I was given, and it was actually by the Buda city manager, assistant city manager right now, Wendy Smith. She mentioned to me that you really need to figure out when you're making that transition, what size of city you want to work for.
Okay.
Do you want to work for a large city, medium size, or small? And so I'd been with Austin, for 20 something years.
You experienced the big city.
Yeah. And so I was like, I don't want to do a big city anymore. Right. I felt like, a medium size or smaller size city, I could make more of an impact. And it was really great for me to go to Buda because Buda is a small city. It's also my hometown. My wife and I have been there for 25 years. Yeah. So, I know Buda. I know, the people there. I've seen it grow. But the decision was good for me to go to a small city because you can't be siloed in a small city. You have to touch every department. You always interacting with people from other departments.
There's a lot less insulation when there's only, 100 or 200 or 300 of you in the entire city.
Yeah. And so that experience has been really good in being able just to kind of get that understanding of how the different departments work. Yeah. And it's necessary for an HR role, right? Because you have to know what those other departments do, how they do it, what their struggles are. So it's been very beneficial to transition into that role, to get that exposure, and just really learn more of the workings of a city like that.
I think you hit on something really profound in that whenever you're facing any kind of transition, you got to start really early to build that foundation. Because I think of coming out of law enforcement, either whether you transition into another career or even transitioning into retirement, you need a firm foundation for retirement. And I think the statistics are 3 to 5 years after you retire, you're dead if you're in law enforcement. Yeah. That's terrifying because y'all don't retire at 80. You retire at like 50, right? You make these transitions really early. And because there's no foundation there, there's nothing to actually build on.
Right.
And I think that idea of start early. So when you are 5 years out from either a transition to a new career or retirement, what does that look like? Because I know even in your desire to be in public service, I want to say in Buda you served on some, was it planning and zoning?
Boards and commissions, I served on the Main Street Advisory Board and the Planning and Zoning Commission. And so that helped me kind of get that network of people that I got to be around. And I don't know if you may have heard Ken Coleman, he's part of Dave Ramsey's team. And he always talks about when you're making that transition, like you want to have the boat as close to the dock as possible, right? Yeah. So because when you step off, you don't want to step in water and drown. You want to be able to get that firm footing and then kind of continue on. And so that was really a great guide for me and a visual for me to kind of get that network in place. It involved a lot of really, and I give this advice to even then, I just had a conversation with an old APD buddy of mine a couple of weeks ago, and he's talking about transitioning out. Yeah. And one of the biggest pieces of advice that I gave him was you really have to get a solid resume, because when people look at your resume, you don't want it to be, all the law enforcement things, all the tactical things and so forth, which while those are important and they're relevant, there are certain skills that you've developed when you've done those things. Yes. So if you can get somebody to help you develop a resume that demonstrates how those skills you've developed translate over into a non-law enforcement field, that was super helpful for me. That's something I invested in, and it was one of the best investments I made.
That's amazing, because I think you're right, that is a part of pulling that boat closer, because I think a lot of people don't even think about the boat. They just jump in and go, oh my gosh, in 20 years, 30 years, I haven't learned to drown.
Yeah, fall in the water.
Yeah. They just fall in, and then they're shocked when they're drowning. And so I think there's something to that transition. I think you've handled that really well. And you, as a part of pulling that boat closer, you also continued your education.
Yes. That was one of the biggest decisions as well, was deciding to go back to get my master's. I hadn't been in school I graduated with my bachelor's 20 years before. Right. Yeah. So going back to school, it was a interesting experience.
Was there some anxiety there? Like, was that a scary experience?
Oh my gosh, it was so scary. But
first day of school,
But I went back to Texas State, and so got my master's through Texas State, and I really credit the graduate advisor when I first came on. Yeah. He had the first class that I took. I took 3 hours just to kind of ease myself back into higher education. Yep. But he gave me some really great feedback, provided a good degree plan for me to kind of map out what it would look like for me to get my master's. But I I found that going back to school 20 years later was a lot easier than it was 20 years before.
Yes.
And that's
You're a little more
because
focused, right?
absolutely, you're accustomed to meeting deadlines. I'd been writing reports and, all kinds of things for 20 years. And so you're
not getting drunk with your buddies every
night.
Yeah,
exactly. So you're a little more focused and your priorities are in order, right?
Yes.
So going back to get my master's, it wasn't easy, but it was an easier process than I remember, getting my bachelor's 20 years before. So, going back, I got my master's, graduated in fall of 22, and then in fall of 23 was when I hit my 23 with APD, which is the magic number for retirement. That's when you get your full. I say full. That's when you can take advantage of the pension, right?
Yeah.
So retired in 23 with my master's, and that position came open in Buda. And interestingly enough, I had applied for an ACM job in Buda just before that, about 6 months before that had come open. And the city manager in Buda, Micah Grau, he's a super guy, just a fantastic public servant. And, his story is pretty awesome as well. Yeah. But he called me up to let me know that I wasn't selected, for the ACM job. And I was disappointed, but he gave me some really good advice. And he said, you're a strong candidate, but you still need some other experience to help kind of solidify your, transition into an ACM role. And so when the HR position came open in Buda, I said, well, let's see how that goes.
Yeah.
And ironically enough, a lot of things I had done with APD had prepared me for that HR position.
Yeah.
So when you talk about HR, there's so many segments to it. Yeah. And I touched a lot of them while I was with APD, did training and development as an instructor at the training academy, was internal affairs, did investigations there, administrative investigations.
Yep.
Went to risk management, was over workers' comp, FMLA, policy implementation. A lot of that were HR related functions. And I found when I was with APD that everything that I did that I felt had value and gave me purpose was when I was focused on helping our officers.
Yeah.
And so that transitioned into this HR role where now I'm helping the employees of the organization. And I told city council last year during the budget cycle was, we serve HR, we serve the employees who serve the community, right? Yeah. So our job is to ensure they're taken care of. And that's what I really enjoy doing. And that was, I think the biggest part of this transition was why I found purpose again. And finding that purpose really was beneficial and helped, give me that drive to look forward to Monday morning to get up and say like, yes, we're going to go do this. And fortunately, a year plus in, I'm still there. I still feel like a kid in a candy store. I love it. And it doesn't hurt that I live 2 miles from the house, right?
That is helpful.
Yeah,
no longer the 45-minute drive every morning.
Absolutely.
Ultimately that purpose is very driving and it's needed because as well as you've navigated this transition, it's still not easy. And that purpose is the thing that provides a lot of energy for that is my guess.
Yes, absolutely. And it hasn't been easy. The stresses are different, but they're still stress.
Yes.
Right. So there's I don't think there's really any job where there's no stress. Yeah. Right. So, the stresses are different, but they're still stress. And because I've, found that reinvigorated purpose and found that drive to serve the employees of Buda, it makes it a lot more manageable for me.
Yeah.
And, obviously with, the conversations we've had over the years, I've really been able to internally focus on what it looks like for me to show up as kind of the best version of myself, like you talk about, so that way I can serve the people that are serving our community.
Yeah, that's beautiful. You're doing a great job.
Well, thanks, man. I appreciate it.
What is, so as you've navigated this long career, what are some of the internal things you've kind of had to work on or overcome to become the leader you are today, to get where you are today?
Oh man, that's a great question. I was fortunate that, I say fortunate and unfortunate. So I'm gonna be a little vulnerable with you right now. So early on in my career, a partner of mine on the same shift was killed in the line of duty. I'm talking like I was 6 months out of the academy.
Oh, wow. That's not early in your career. That is the beginning.
Yeah, the beginning of the career. Yeah. So, when that happened, it affected me more than I thought it did at the time.
Yeah.
And that didn't manifest for some years and in a really unhealthy way.
Yeah.
And so fortunately, after, it manifested in that unhealthy way, it forced me to kind of start looking at myself and what I was doing or not doing to show up as a healthy person. And so that started my journey into kind of ensuring that, I'm taking care of myself. I'm learning about myself. So one, I could show up to serve, whether it be the citizens of Austin, whether it be the officers on my shift, or anybody that's assigned to me, or now with Buda. And two, what are the things that I need to do to ensure that, they're becoming their best selves, right? Because I didn't want to see anybody else go through what I went through. So that's why, I'm trying to help people and help them understand more about themselves, because that's really where the journey starts. And it's not until you put the mirror at, look in the mirror that journey really begins. Because a lot of times, and what I was guilty of this was earlier in younger in my career with APD, I would always point the finger, right? It was somebody else's fault. It wasn't my fault, right? Because I was doing everything correctly. As a 5-year, 10-year cop, you know everything. You haven't seen, you've seen it all. And so you know everything, right? And so I quickly found out that no, I don't know everything. And so if I want to learn and progress personally and professionally, then I had to really do some deep diving internally.
Yeah. How long was it roughly between losing your partner in the line of duty and it starting to manifest in really unhealthy ways, whatever the event was?
About 5 years.
About 5 years. Yeah. And I think there's something, we talk about the brokenness of law enforcement, ultimately being it's a system built for robots. It is not built for humans. It is built for the robot who can lose their partner in the line of duty and not have any ill effects, could just get back up, get back in the car, go back to the next call, right? That's the way we kind of function, and yet that's not who we are.
Yeah.
And so ultimately we've talked about the idea that it does come out. The sharp edges start to come out. It does not matter who you are, how strong you are.
Yeah.
You cannot contain that kind of trauma and not have something come out.
Yeah.
And so were there ways, and this has been quite a while, and so policing has changed immensely over the last 2 decades.
For sure.
Back then, was it just more of the just suck it up, just move on, and eventually it came out in a negative way? Were there things you wish you had taken advantage of, or were there even things to take advantage of back then?
There were things to take advantage of, and I wish I had taken advantage of them. And yes, back then it was pretty much the, you just suck it up, you go back to your shift. Fortunately, when that happened, we had patrol shifts that covered our shift for 2 weeks, so we could kind of decompress a little bit, right? But even then, it wasn't enough, right? There was still more work to be done in that respect. But you show up to work, and then you start taking your calls, and the world just kind of keeps moving forward, but you don't see the monster that's brewing within, right?
Yes.
And so when it and manifested in unhealthy ways, there were things that I could have taken advantage of, and I didn't. One of them being, staff psychologists, or just seeking any type of therapy, right?
Yeah.
Policing, and I think the workforce, maybe more so in policing, I don't know about, public service, but it's changed now to the point where I see more and more people in public service taking more care of, or better care of, their mental health. Which is super important.
It's a movement that's starting.
Yes. Yeah. And I don't know when it started, but, having experienced it myself later in my career in APD, understanding that, okay, I needed to take advantage of that service that was being provided to us, and going into therapy, getting those things out, trying to figure out, how I could move forward from them. That was really beneficial. And I think that the sooner you can do that, the better. Because, as I said, if you don't take advantage of it and you don't do the work, then it comes out in that unhealthy way.
Did you have people around you at the time in your circle, friends or mentors or people, to push you in that direction?
I had one, but he really didn't. He was a mentor of mine. He was a former chaplain over with APD. He was over the wellness department as well. His name's Rick Randall. And so he became a mentor years later. And so when he and I would meet and we would talk about things, that conversation would come up, and then he would really kind of guide me towards, this is what you should do. Here's some resources. Here's some books you should read. That's when I started to really dive into reading and,
learning, understanding you need to grow.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So Rick was a huge part of the growth and recovery. And I'll just, again, still be vulnerable. I'm still recovering from that.
Yes.
I'm not sure if I'll ever really get over it, because it's something that just, it lives with you.
Yeah.
And so it's just something that I continually work on and kind of little by little, day by day.
That's what the funny part about therapy is. It is ultimately whatever type you're involved in, it's getting tools to deal with the thing when it comes up. It's going to come up. It's going to happen. How do we navigate that? It's the same thing as learning to navigate grief.
Yeah.
It is, the grief is going to happen. How are you then going to respond to that? Are you going to fight it? Are you going to use tools necessary to help you get through that? And it's very similar to that. I think there's something to, we think about, one of the things that we tell our officers early on is don't get rid of all your friends that are not in law enforcement, because I think there's this insular community that understands us. So that's the only people we connect with.
Right.
But if those people are also operating from the place of just suck it up, there's nobody going, please get help.
Yeah.
And I think that circle, that tighter circle, to have 3, 4, 5 people in your lives that are pushing you to be better, that don't let us just sit and suffer.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things we've got to work on to figure out how do we get them more tightly connected with others. And I think our society is naturally kind of pulling apart in terms of connection. We've got to get better at that.
Yeah, unfortunately, that the downfall or whatever of social media, and everybody's got a screen in front of them, unfortunately. But those connections are important, and those are things that I still try to intentionally do. Right. So even being as a HR director, right, I still need friends that are not with the city, people that don't work in the city that I can hang out with, decompress, and, just kind of enjoy each other's company. And, and if need be, I do have a circle of friends that I say that I could call at any time, and they would, at a drop of a hat, come and help me if I needed. So I'm fortunate in that respect. And I'm not sure everybody has that, but if you don't, I would recommend you go find them.
Absolutely. We have to intentionally build it. And I'm not the most relational person. So it is I'm not good at maintaining friendships. It is a two-way street, which is why I think a thing we lose sight of that just occurred to me is whenever we reach out to our friends for help, they are also getting so much benefit.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Like usually our breakfast, because I'm not super relational, will involve you texting me and saying, let's get together.
Yes.
And it's almost never me reaching out proactively because I'm not good at that. But it's so valuable for me to connect with another human, to have conversations, to talk about what we're in the middle of. And I think there's something there for people, not just in law enforcement, but, you talked about the grind of public service. Mm-hmm. We have to have people around us on that journey, so it's not just us trying to shove the boulder up the hill.
Yeah, absolutely. And not only that, I mean, you get those different perspectives. Yeah. And so people have different experiences, or maybe even similar experiences, and they can help you, navigate yours, or you can maybe help them in navigating theirs. So yeah, those connections are important. Relationships are super important, whether you're in law enforcement, whether you're HR director, it doesn't matter. Having those connections and that circle of people that you can go to is super helpful.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. What are you intentionally doing? Because it sounds like through your career, you developed a lot of self-awareness, and a lot of, you see the need for determining how you show up. What are some things you intentionally do to really invest in yourself to make sure you are showing up as healthy? Because we've talked about your personality type, the helper. You will give everything you've got, and that cup will be empty. And so what do you do to reinvest in yourself? What does that look like for you?
One of the biggest things that I do is I have a morning routine. And so I get up super early and make myself a cup of coffee. I'll go sit down, and I will do some meditation and then journal for about 30 minutes. Yeah. And the journaling has been probably one of the best things that I've started doing over the last several years, because it's really an outlet for kind of the frustrations that you may have, just things you might be thinking about. So for me, it's been super helpful to also note in there what you're grateful for.
Yes.
Noting what you're grateful for has been really huge, because we can always look at the things that we're frustrated with, the things that are bothering us, but taking the time to look at what you're grateful for has been super helpful for me. I'll also read. Reading a lot in the mornings. I don't, I'll read as much as I can, but then, as the time goes, then the responsibilities start, right? So
kids wake up.
Yes, kids wake up. They got to get to school, and so then that happens, and life begins in the morning, right? But that time that I have in the morning, the time of solitude is what I like to call it, has been really helpful. That's something that I use to help me show up as a healthy version. Because if I can get in that time of journaling, if I can get those frustrations out, if I can get, the thoughts I may have, or maybe even things that I might want to work on.
Yeah.
Right. If I can get them down first thing in the morning, then I can start from there and kind of hopefully have a better version of myself show up at work.
That time makes such a difference. And I love the idea of getting everything out of you, because I think that's again, we go back to the challenges we run into in both law enforcement and public service. We just kind of keep it all inside.
Yep.
And eventually it comes out in really unhealthy ways. So let's get it out early, right? I do the same thing with the journaling, and I think I don't spend 30 minutes on it, so yours is probably more in depth than mine. But even like this morning, I spent more time on it because I was struggling with something in my mindset, and I got to then dissect the story and say, okay, what stories am I telling myself that are disempowered? How do I want to rewrite that? And that time got me into a place of, okay, let's go. We're going to go create success today.
Yeah.
I'm no longer living out this story that I don't want to live out anymore.
Yeah.
But it was that intentional time to journal. And there are these interesting rhythms where you need the rhythm of solitude and reflection and what do I want to create, but then there's rhythms of not solitude, of connection and people, and we have to honor all of those, and it's when we stop honoring them that things go badly for us. And so
for sure,
it sounds like you've got a really good balance.
I have a decent balance. I don't know if it's the best, right? So I think I'm still working on it. But there are other things I would like to do. I've been trying to take physical health into consideration. I think that's always the worst for the hardest for people, especially as you get older. It just becomes more difficult.
It's the easiest to understand and the hardest to do.
Absolutely.
Right?
It always is. So, making some time for that has been difficult. I'm starting doing a little bit more. But yeah, no, I mean, I'm doing what I can.
Yeah. I like that.
Yeah.
If you had to talk to anybody, because your kids are getting older now, and so if they were considering public service, what advice would you have for them? What would you tell them?
Oh man. I would tell them, be sure that you want to enter this profession. Because like I said earlier, as it can be rewarding, it's not easy. And two, don't expect the mountaintop a year or two into your career. I see a lot of younger people that aspire to be a director or a city manager. Thinking that, as soon as they graduate college,
they're mad when they're not that at 27.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's okay, right? Because it is a journey. It's a marathon. I think you've mentioned that before, that public service is a marathon and it's not a sprint. And so that every year that you're spending time on yourself, spending time honing your craft, spending your time getting better, you're setting yourself up for what may come, right? Putting yourself in that right position. So, it's funny because my son, he's in high school now and he's the youngest, but he started talking about wanting to be a firefighter. And I said, great. Yeah. I would support it 100%. I don't know if I'd say that if he said, I want to be a police officer,
That's a conversation I have a lot because here's you know what? Our last guest almost knocked his off. Almost knocked mine off this time. We're leaving that in, by the way, John. It's funny because I have that conversation a lot with cops who have been through it, and they're like, I don't know that I want my kids to be cops. The problem is we need more and more really good people to be cops.
Yeah.
And so how would you navigate that?
It's tough. I talked about this with a former supervisor of mine who's retired. He does a lot of work with the Texas Municipal League now.
Yeah.
His name's Mike Alexander. And we had this discussion not 2 weeks ago, and he said to me, if I could go back and navigate it now with the knowledge I have now, I'd do it.
Yeah.
But he said, I don't know if I would go back and do it again all over as a novice.
The way it was.
Right. And so that's the thing, is that I don't know, man. I'd probably tell my son, it's a great profession. It can be very rewarding, but I would definitely need to guide him in how to be introspective, how to ensure that you are not destroying yourself internally with some of the things you may be doing or with some of the things that you're seeing. So that's going to be super important. So, I mean, I would support him, obviously, but I would be there side by side along the way trying to figure out, helping him navigate it. Now, if he becomes a firefighter, not to say that firefighting isn't hard. I respect firefighters, but
do we?
Yeah.
Yes, we do. We love our firefighters.
As
much as there's competition, we love them.
I do. I love our firefighters. But I think, for them, and I don't mean this in a negative way, I feel like they do experience similar struggles, but they do have the opportunity to, that exercise that they get to do in their station houses, I think is super important.
Well, and the connection they have with each other.
Oh, absolutely. Because they're around each other for 24 hours or whatever the case may be. Right. Yeah. So I think that connection that they have and the outlets that they have are super beneficial and helpful for that profession. Yeah. And it's unfortunate that law enforcement can't have that similar outlet. I mean, you can, just not in the same structure,
yes. Right? And that's where I think that's why I'm so passionate about this, because you're right about something. It is ultimately, law enforcement needs to change. Mm-hmm. And you're right. If we had to go back and go through everything you went through and do it all over again exactly the same, that's a hard choice to make. Yep. Even though through that time, by the way, thousands of lives were impacted just through your work. Every person you helped has family that loves them. Their lives were impacted. So we're trading our lives and our well-being for that impact.
Right.
And the question becomes, can we create a system where we don't have to trade our well-being for that impact? And absolutely, I think that's why it is on this generation to fix this, to say that we are going to create a place where our sons and daughters are going to choose to be police officers. Yeah. And we're going to be excited because we know they're going to have an impact, and we are not requiring of them their well-being. Yeah. We are making sure it's supported. And I am so passionate about that, because we didn't necessarily, our generation didn't screw that system up. We didn't create it, but we didn't fix it either.
No, absolutely not.
And I think there's enough conversations happening now in the movement towards how do we fix this? And it starts with acknowledging we're all human beings. Yeah. And that's step one. And that's why I love these conversations so much.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And, that starting with we're all humans is important, so understanding that we all share this mortal coil and just trying to, live our lives and do the best for ourselves and everybody else around us.
Yes.
So yeah, that's super important.
Yeah, that's interesting. So how does somebody know, you talked about public service as a calling. Mm-hmm. How does somebody know if they're called to public service?
For me, when I went to school for my bachelor's, I initially wanted to be an attorney. Okay. So I thought I want to do law. And I don't know what sparked that. I know it wasn't like a TV show or something.
It was the BMWs.
Maybe so. Maybe it was the flashy suits and the Rolex. Yes, absolutely. Yes, one day. So no, but I wanted to be an attorney, and I don't know why. I just love that debate. Yeah, that arguing. And then somewhere along the road, maybe it was the fact that law school was so expensive, but I, decided to major in criminal justice and decided to go the route of law enforcement. Yeah. So, like I said early on, and when you're young, I was 24 at the time, and so when they asked me on that oral board, why do you want to be an Austin police officer? I was like, because I want to help people, I want to serve the community, and so forth. And my mom, she passed away 10 years ago, but she was very involved in the community in our hometown. Yeah. And so she was on the school board, she was very much involved with a lot of the community events. And so I think that desire for service in that respect kind of came from her and watching her and what she did. And so it was passed on to me. My brother was also a police officer. He worked for Corpus Christi PD, retired as an assistant chief. So, we both had, I would say, very successful law enforcement careers. Yep. But I think a lot of that was because our mother modeled that service, single mom as well, right? So she's, working hard to raise two boys. And so that idea of working hard and service kind of, I think, was instilled in us at a young age. And so it felt natural when I did it. And I'm fortunate that the transition to city government, non-law enforcement was also a natural transition.
Yeah. It's funny as you're talking about that. I'm wondering if we're not all called to service, and yet it's what's modeled for us. What is the way that we serve? How do we make other people's lives better? And for you, it was modeled through that public sector.
Yeah, absolutely.
Interesting.
I think we are all called to public service, or not public service, but to service.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think we each have, whether it be in the public sector or the private sector, there's some level of service we're providing for some person. Yes. Right. And so I think that it's just kind of an innate thing in people. Yeah. And it's just a matter of where you do it.
Your transition from law enforcement to HR, it's been a pretty natural transition. There's a lot of things that transfer really, really well. Is there anything that surprised you in that journey?
Benefits and budget.
about how amazing they are.
Yeah. Well, no, they're great. So, as I stated before, I had, the risk management background, administrative investigations, training and development, right?
Yeah.
So those are just some aspects of HR, but there's also recruiting, hiring, benefits administration, onboarding employees.
Yeah.
I'm fortunate I have a solid HR generalist. You've met Jennifer, she's super. And so she helped with my transition into those particular worlds. But learning benefits, man, that was tough.
Yeah.
Learning the budget process for the city was tough. I loved it and I'm still enjoying it, right? Because I still haven't, I haven't arrived when it comes to benefits. I'm still learning.
Yeah.
But the budget part, man, we're about to get into budget season next month. And I am super excited because it's, I don't know why. And people look at me when I say I'm excited about budget. They're like, what are you talking about? Yeah. I don't know what it is about the numbers, but I enjoy trying to figure out, okay, what do I need for next year? What's city council going to approve?
Yeah.
And how do I justify it to them? Right. I got to justify it to the city manager first, but then ultimately to council.
Yeah.
And it's easy for me to justify it because I'm a firm believer, and I'm not trying to spend everybody's money, but we have to invest in our employees, and that involves monetary investments.
Yes.
If you don't have the money to do it, then I think you're just running your people down to the ground, man. Because if you can't invest in them somehow, whether it be an employee engagement development or employee engagement event, whether you bring cookies or bagels or tacos or whatever, or you have professional development, bringing in training for your employees. If you can't invest in them like that, you're just running them into the ground. And so it's super important for me.
There was an interesting story that popped up on LinkedIn a while back about a city who, I can't remember the details of it, but essentially, you know what I'm talking about, right? They did an employee congratulation or thank you party or something, and everybody lost their minds that we were spending public money on this kind of thing. And yet, again, these are not robots. These are human beings. And if a company said, we're going to throw a year-end party for our people, we're going to have prizes they can win, and we're going to, as a company, pay for those, everybody would be like, okay, that makes sense.
For sure.
Because that's people, right? And in public service, people are like, those are tax dollars. And they are, and we're going to be super careful with them. But part of what we're building with those tax dollars is a system where humans can thrive. Because when they do that, they do their best work.
Absolutely.
They serve the public and they make people's lives better, and it is worth that investment.
Oh, absolutely. If you can demonstrate to government employees, city employees, that they are valued and that the people care about them, they are going to show up excited, happy to do their job, helping them find that purpose in what they do, So I'm a firm believer, pizza only goes so far, right? But it's delicious, right? So, I'm a firm believer in those pizza parties, in the ping pong tournaments. I'm in, we got Buda University coming up in a couple of weeks, and that professional development, pouring into the employees, letting them know that we care about you so much that we want to see you thrive in this organization. And not only does it improve morale, it improves retention, and that's the biggest thing for us, for our city specifically. We've been trying to battle that turnover. And so we're doing a better job.
You're in a large metro area where you got much bigger cities with bigger budgets.
For sure.
More.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
really hard to combat.
It is. And so we're doing a better job, and I think it's really affecting our employees in a positive way. And so I'm hoping that does reduce our turnover. But ultimately, yes, they are tax dollars going towards these events, but just know that it's
value.
Absolutely. A lot of value in it.
Yeah. One of our previous guests, Lauren Rose, she talked about the idea that in order for, we want people to love the city, but the city actually has to love the people. And I think the same is true of our team. If they don't know they're loved, they're not going to show up and love citizens. And so this all ties back to how we are taking care of our people. And it's funny, I think pizza parties get a bad rap because there's always the memes about them, because you got organizations that don't do anything for their people and don't communicate, don't take care of them, create toxic work environments. They're like, this pizza will fix everything.
Yes, right.
It's not the solve for everything.
Right.
But it doesn't hurt, right? If we're doing it in conjunction with 1,000 other things to help, it's an amazing tool.
Absolutely, it is. And I think one of the other biggest things is engaging the employees. And I don't mean, just with the pizza party, right? But Jennifer, she's making a more concerted effort now, like because Public Works and Parks are siloed out in their buildings. So she goes and she spends a day out there now every week.
That makes a huge difference.
Absolutely. And she's gotten such a positive response from that, right? And this was on her initiative. Like she said, I want to go out and do that, right? I want to go and show them that We care about them. We're accessible. You don't have to come to City Hall and visit HR. We're accessible.
This is not the castle that everybody has to come see the king.
Exactly. And so she's done a great job with that. And so engaging the employees where they are is also equally important. I can't tell you the impact when the city manager is walking into City Hall and he says good morning to every one of the utility billing clerks. Just the impact of just saying good morning, how are you? Hope you have a good day. It's insurmountable. And so that connection is important. So it's the pizza parties, it's everything else, but it's also those individual one-on-ones. How can we engage our employees and let them know that we value them?
Yeah. It's funny, earlier we were talking about how the law enforcement system is not built for humans. In a lot of ways, the public service system is not quite built for humans either. And all these conversations, we're trying to create movement towards thriving. How do we help cities learn how to create a thriving place for their teams? So outside of that connection and the pizza parties and the actual ways of showing love to our team, what do we need to rethink? Are there things we need to do differently or new ideas we need to embrace in order to create that thriving environment for our people?
Absolutely, there are. So we talked earlier about, when I started my career, I'm sure when you were younger in your career, it was, we're just glad to have a job. And we're glad that somebody wants to pay us every 2 weeks to do what we do. So we're just happy we have a job. Well, it's not that anymore. There has to be more. I just finished the book, The 4 Stages of Psychological Safety by Timothy Clark. And in that book, one of the quotes that just really sat with me and made me really think, and this is where I think we need to go, is he says that the employee that expects the employee to bring the organization that expects the employee to bring their whole selves to their work needs to engage the whole employee. And so I think that's where we're failing right now, and where we need to move towards is engaging the whole employee. Because right now, that the 4 stages of psychological safety talks about inclusion. We're all humans, right? Learner, we can learn from this from this environment. Contributor, where they're part of the team. And then challenger, where they're comfortable with challenging the status quo, right? Which is what we want. Before, when I was a rookie offier, I didn't dare question what my sergeant did,
That's a fast track to getting demoted.
Absolutely.
If not beaten.
No. And now, you want to encourage that. You want to encourage employees at all levels to challenge the status quo. We want to make them feel like they're contributing, like we have something to offer them, and that we accept them for who they are. And so that's where I think we need to change. What we need to change in public service is engaging the whole employee, because they're more than just, whatever their role is in the organization. They're a parent, they're a spouse, they're a child, so we have to engage the employee at that whole level.
Well, we talk about all the time, the way we show up as leaders determines how they go home. It's acknowledging that, we're focused on, we got these tasks to do and we need to accomplish something together. But I need to be cognizant of the fact that when you go home to be a father and a husband, some of the quality of that is dictated by me. How I lead you. Am I creating a tremendous amount of stress that you're carrying home with you? It matters so much. And I think one of the things you were talking about on the challenging side, this is going to be really interesting, because for an employee under us to challenge us, I think first we have to realize in most cases they're not challenging our authority. They're not challenging who we are. Which means we have to be really healthy. We have to know we're enough. We have to pull ego off the shelf and understand they're usually asking why, because they want to know, does this thing matter, so I know if I matter? And we need to be able to provide that why. We need to be able to dive into. I think you just finished, or you were in the middle of, or just finished reading the book. My mind just went completely blank. Jocko Willink wrote the
Extreme Ownership.
Extreme Ownership, right? So we always have to bring the why. They always have to seek the why. We're going to meet in the middle, because we're going to do it imperfectly. And in that challenging is how we find that. And yet we came up in a system that's not built for that.
No, absolutely
So
not.
that's how we have to, as leaders, have to say, okay, I'm okay with y'all questioning.
That's really it. You have to be, as a leader or someone higher up in the organization, you have to be okay with your employees coming to you and just asking that question, why? Why are we doing this? And not only that, you have to be able to give the explanation.
Yeah.
It can't be, well, we've always done it that way, right? That's the worst.
That's like mom saying, because I said so.
Yeah.
That is not helpful, right?
No, absolutely not. So yeah, it's never, it can't be, that's the way we've always done it.
Yeah.
You have to understand why you're doing it. And if you don't understand why, then you really need to rethink why you're doing it.
Absolutely.
So,
and I think there's something to understanding when somebody comes and asks why, our first thought should not be, why are they questioning me? Our first thought should be, ooh, I haven't done a good job providing the why.
Yeah.
Because when I gave them the orders in the first place, I should have included why and made sure they all fully understood it and were bought in on that why.
Absolutely. And that's
I didn't do a good job.
Well, that's the unfortunate part about, I say unfortunate, but it's sometimes necessary in law enforcement.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just can't ask that why.
Oh, 100%.
You got to give you give the order, and then the order's got to be followed, right?
Yes.
But there are times in any organization where it's okay to ask that why, right?
This is the thing, and I think we put everything in the emergency life and death bucket. Like it's this giant horse trough full of things, and really it's a shot glass. It's small, right? So the example I always give is when you're stacked up on a door about to kick it in, that is not the time for somebody to go, hey, why are we doing this, boss? Like we should have already covered it.
Yeah,
that
for sure.
Is not the time.
Yeah.
But those situations are actually exceedingly rare.
Mm-hmm.
There are very few of those. There are so many other and almost infinite amount of moments when we do have the ability to pause, to provide why, to have a conversation, to get them bought in.
Oh, absolutely.
That's interesting. There's, I think, something you hit on earlier, and we're kind of dancing around now. You said when you got in HR, you had Jennifer as your generalist.
Mm-hmm.
And so talk to me about the vulnerability of leadership to step into a space as the person in charge and say, here's areas I know almost nothing about, and I need your help.
Yeah.
How difficult is that?
It's definitely a balance, right? So you don't want to appear incompetent.
Yes.
But at the same time, you have to be vulnerable.
Yes.
And I think I'd gotten to a point in my life where I don't want to say I didn't care, but I was okay with being vulnerable with Jennifer. And so I remember, the first month that I was there after the, former HR director retired, and I was on my own, and Jennifer was there, and we were kind of trying to tackle everything together. I sat her down and I said, look, I don't know a lot of this stuff, and I'm going to rely on you to help guide me through some of these things.
Yeah.
There may be things that I may need to take on and I'll get better at, but it's going to take some time.
Yeah.
And I think that admitting to her and being vulnerable with her and that I don't know some of this stuff and I need your help, she's been, very, very helpful in that respect.
Yes.
I do feel like I frustrate her sometimes because she's like, you should know this by now, right? But
which is indicative of her personality.
Yeah,
for
sure. Yeah. Sense. Yeah. But no, she's been very patient, and I've been fortunate to get some positive feedback from her.
Yeah.
In the style of leadership that I've taken on with her. And I try to take on, I guess you would call it kind of an authentic leadership style, because I do try to be vulnerable, kind of admit what I don't know.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I also try to be sure of the things I do know. For example, the first HR investigation that I had to do as an HR director, right? I mean, I've got the internal affairs investigative experience. And so I'm thinking to myself, this is going to be great. But when I started doing it the way I knew how, I could see that look from Jen and like, what are you doing? Because it was like, to the nth degree, which is what I was accustomed to. And so, even though I did have that expertise and I could do it, she did have to kind of like, well, maybe you should kind of consider this because, we're not in a law enforcement setting. This is a civilian setting. And she comes from a military background as well. So she kind of understands that transition also. She's been super helpful in helping me make that transition. And I'd like to say that she's kind of come into her own as well.
Yeah. And the thing is understanding it's a two-way street.
Yeah.
You're vulnerable, but it's mixed with determination.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm going to need your help because I don't know some things, but I'm going to learn those things. I am determined to make this work. And I think in all aspects of leadership, even in totally different scenarios, it's that ability to say, I don't know, I'm afraid, I'm hurt, I'm unsure, but we're going to make it. we're going to figure it out. And that mixture is what we're after. And I think people think of vulnerability as just, I'm going to rip it open and say, I don't know. And then they're going to attack me and it's going to go badly.
Yeah.
But what happens is when you did that, you said she's come into her own.
Yeah.
Through helping you, she is being reminded of things. She's learning things in a more deep way.
Yeah.
And it's actually building a really good team.
Yeah.
And that's what's missing often when nobody's vulnerable, when we pretend we got it all figured out. We're not actually binding together as a team in either a physiological, chemical way or even in an emotional way.
Yeah.
And yet we need that.
Yeah. You can definitely be siloed within your own department, right?
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah. And so that become, obviously you can't function well in a department like that when you're siloed amongst yourselves. And I've seen that before in organizations.
How often are teams struggling because they are siloed as a team? Because the walls are up and the walls are made of, I'm not going to be vulnerable with any of y'all.
Yep.
That is a fascinating idea. I've never thought of being siloed within a team.
Yeah. And I've seen it,
and we do it to ourselves, right?
Absolutely. Because I think a part of it is because this is mine. Yeah. This is mine.
Yes.
In this team, I know how to do this.
Yes.
I'm not going to show anybody else how to do it, and I'm going to own it. Yeah. Right. And so because of that, you automatically separate yourself from the team. You don't allow yourself to grow, and you don't allow them to grow.
Yes.
Right. So I'd rather not say how I've seen it, but yes, I have seen it before. Yeah.
Dude, I guarantee you this is every team. We're going to start talking about this idea and people are going to go, oh my God, that's all of us. By the way, I'm completely stealing this idea.
Please do. Absolutely.
Just so everyone is clear, this is Matt's concept, but I'm about to take this thing and make it
Take it and run, please. Please. You probably do it better than I do anyway. So.
This is going to be really good. I'm excited. Man, listen, this has been the best conversation.
This has been awesome.
Thank you so much for doing this. You had a ton of insight for us.
And I told you before the podcast started that, because I am a 2 on the Enneagram, I didn't feel worthy to come here. And so you've been very good about, letting me know that, I've been doing some good things, but I know you've had some heavy hitters on this podcast and I've listened to all of them. And I'm just humbled that I would be considered to be here sitting in this seat across from you, because not only have you had some heavy hitters here, but you're also doing great work. And I love to see it. I love to see how you and your team have grown since I first met you.
Yeah.
It's been 5-6 years now?
Yeah, it's been a while.
And so this has been an awesome experience for me. And I'm so glad that you had me on.
Thank you, brother. Your wisdom's going to help a lot of people, man.
Thanks, man.
Thank you for joining us for Leading Thriving Cities. We are dedicated to giving away everything we teach and, importantly, everything we learn while we're on the ground partnering with cities to develop healthy leaders and thriving teams. You can find all of that leadership development content on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Just search for @ForwardPartner. You can also find more information about what we do at forwardpartners.net.